The courtroom was tense. Wood-paneled walls held the air still, heavy with anticipation. The trial had captured local headlines for weeks. A child abuse case against a man named Carl Dempsey, a respected member of the community, accused of unspeakable acts. But the evidence was thin. No DNA, no fingerprints, no photographs. Just a scared little girl who had once lived under his roof. 7-year-old Emily Parker was the prosecution's last hope. She looked tiny in the witness box. Her blonde hair fell across her face as she clutched a worn-out stuffed bunny to her chest. The courtroom stared in silence. Her feet didn't even touch the floor. Judge Mendez peered over her glasses. "Emily, do you understand why you're here today?" Emily didn't respond. She just stared at the floor. The prosecutor cleared her throat. "Your Honor, the witness has been through significant trauma. We request that Officer Max, a certified police therapy K-9, be allowed to enter the courtroom for emotional support." The defense attorney stood. "Objection. That may sway the jury emotionally." Judge Mendez raised a hand. "Overruled. This court will do what it must to allow this child to speak." A side door opened, and a gentle stir ran through the courtroom. In came Max, a sleek, golden-furred Labrador in a navy blue police vest that read K-9 Comfort Unit. He walked beside Officer Tran, his handler, with calm confidence. His steps were quiet, but everyone noticed. Emily's eyes slowly lifted. Max trotted up to the witness stand and sat down quietly beside her. He didn't bark, didn't whimper. He simply looked at her and wagged his tail once. Then something strange happened. Emily stopped clutching her bunny. Her fingers froze. Her eyes widened, not with comfort, but with shock. The entire courtroom noticed the shift. She didn't smile, didn't soften. She just stared at Max, rigid and still. Officer Tran took a step forward. "It's okay, Emily. Max is here to help." But Emily didn't seem comforted. She leaned slightly away from the dog, not toward him. The judge spoke gently. "Is something wrong, sweetheart?" Emily looked at Max, her lips parted, but unmoving. Then she raised her small, trembling arm, pointed at the dog, and said just 2 words. "He knows." A wave of confusion washed over the room. The courtroom murmured. The bailiff snapped, "Order!" But even he sounded unsure. What was happening? The judge blinked. "What do you mean, Emily?" Emily didn't respond. She simply lowered her hand and curled back into herself, hugging her stuffed bunny again. The guardian ad litem, a woman named Ms. Reyes, stepped toward the judges' bench and requested a short recess to speak privately with Emily. Granted. Judge Mendez said, still trying to understand what just happened. Emily was quietly escorted to a private witness room, just outside the courtroom. Max remained seated in the witness box, his head cocked slightly, as if trying to understand why the girl had spoken those words. Officer Tran sat beside him, clearly unsettled. Dogs are trained for many things, but they aren't trained to trigger cryptic whispers like he knows. Inside the private room, Ms. Reyes knelt beside Emily. "Sweetheart, do you know Max?" Emily nodded faintly. Then, in a quiet voice barely above a whisper, she said, "He barked at the basement." Ms. Reyes blinked. "What basement, honey?" Emily clutched her bunny tighter. "The old house. The door." He barked and barked. He was there. Ms. Reyes's heart skipped a beat. "Are you saying that dog, Max, was at your house?" "Before." Emily looked at her. This time, she nodded with certainty. He tried to help. That was enough. Ms. Reyes stepped out and contacted the prosecutor immediately. Within minutes, 2 investigators were tasked with pulling Max's service history. When the report came back, jaws dropped. Max had, in fact, been involved in a drug and trafficking raid 2 years ago at a house in suburban Oregon. the same house where Emily had lived with her stepfather. During that raid, no children were found, and only one man, Carl Dempsey, had been detained but released. No basement had been searched due to a locked utility room and lack of probable cause. Max had been there, not just as a comfort dog, as a working police K-9 on duty during a criminal investigation. The pieces began to fit in eerie silence. Back in the courtroom, Judge Mendez reconvened the session. The prosecutor stood and, with clear urgency in her voice, announced, "We have reason to believe that the K-9 officer Max was present during a prior investigation involving the defendant at the very location where the alleged victim lived. We request immediate access to Max's full handler, logs, and body cam footage from that raid." The defense attorney objected, rattled. "This is speculation, hearsay at best." But the judge had heard enough. She turned to the bailiff. "Get me everything on that raid, now." Emily was brought back into the room. This time, she walked in slowly, her eyes not fearful but watchful. Max stood when she entered. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He simply looked at her, the way dogs do when they remember. Emily sat down, placed her hand on Max's back, and took a deep breath. No one in the room said a word. They didn't need to. She had already said the most important two. The courtroom had never seen anything like it. A child witness who had barely uttered a word now sat stroking the back of a police K-9 with a strange familiarity, as though she'd known him longer than anyone else in the room. The prosecution team, once on the defensive, was suddenly buzzing with a new kind of energy. Even the judge appeared shaken. Emily had not only pointed at the dog, she had claimed he knew. And now she had said something even more shocking. In the private room, he barked at the basement. The basement. Detective Sarah Langley, one of the lead investigators now pulled onto the reopened raid, sat in a side conference room with Max's prior handler, Officer James Kelly. Was already reviewing notes from 2 years ago. His brow furrowed the deeper he read. "She's not wrong," Kelly muttered. "We hit that house in late 2023. It was a joint operation suspected meth production. Signs of human trafficking. We brought Max because of his narcotics detection and behavioral response training. He did signal at a locked basement door." Detective Langley leaned in. "Did anyone go in?" Kelly sighed. "No. The sergeant in charge said we didn't have cause. They documented the room as a utility cellar. We weren't there long." Dempsey was cuffed, but released after the initial search came up clean. Langley tapped her pen on the table. "Do you still have Max's GPS and body cam logs?" "I never deleted them," Kelly said, pulling out an old flash drive. "I'll transfer them now." Back inside the courtroom, Emily remained on the stand. Her fingers had loosened slightly on the stuffed bunny. Max stayed by her side, his body pressed against the witness box, like he belonged there. He hadn't moved much, only breathing deeply and watching Emily like a protector who never left post. The judge leaned forward. "Emily, do you remember Max from the night of that raid?" Emily nodded slowly. He barked and barked. They didn't listen to him. A murmur spread across the courtroom, but the judge lifted a hand to silence. Why was he barking, Emily?" The prosecutor asked gently. The little girl's voice was faint, but steady. "Because the monsters were hiding in the basement." The silence that followed felt like someone had turned off the oxygen. In the room. In the gallery, Dempsey's expression cracked for the first time. His usually smug posture collapsed into something more defensive. His hands twitched in his lap. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. The prosecutor stepped back from the podium, stunned. The judge called for another recess. "This court will reconvene in 1 hour, pending immediate retrieval of all officer logs, GPS recordings, and canine behavior reports from the 2023 raid." Down the hall, In the evidence review room, Officer Kelly played the body cam footage. From the raid, the screen lit up. Max barking, tail stiff, body tense, eyes fixed on a dark wooden door at the rear of the basement hallway. The handler pulled on his leash, but Max planted himself, growling low. He kept barking at the door and even tried to paw at it. Behind him, muffled voices argued over priorities. And a voice, the commanding sergeant, snapped, "Forget it, or not busting up someone's boiler room." The video cut to black. Langley slammed her hand on the table. Jesus, the dog was right. Kelly exhaled. He always is. By the time court resumed, both the defense and prosecution had reviewed the footage. The entire room had changed. No longer was it a child's word against a seemingly innocent man. Now there was a dog, a forgotten warning, and digital proof. That something had gone terribly wrong that night. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, we submit body cam footage and behavior logs, confirming that K9 Max did, in fact, alert at a locked basement door during the raid on Mr. Dempsey's residence. In 2023, his signals were ignored. New evidence now suggests that the witness was present at the time and remembers." The defense attorney objected, but his voice lacked force. "This is circumstantial. Dogs bark. Kids imagine things. None of this proves criminal behavior." But Judge Mendez had already made up her mind. "I am authorizing an emergency search warrant for the same property. Officers Langley and Kelly will lead. Court will recess until further notice." Max was escorted out of the courtroom with Emily beside him. The two walked together like old friends. She didn't need to be held or coaxed anymore. A girl who had once been too afraid to speak now walked with a kind of quiet confidence. In the hallway, she turned to Max and said, "You tried. I remember. I'm sorry no one listened." Max looked up at her, his tongue slightly out, his tail giving a soft thump on the tile. Detective Langley passed them by with purpose in her stride. A search team was already mobilizing. This time, they wouldn't ignore Max's warning. This time, the basement would be opened. Inside the courtroom, Carl Dempsey sat stone-faced. But his eyes darted now, flickering in every direction, like a man who knew the end was creeping in. His lawyer whispered again, but this time he didn't answer. Because he had seen it too, the moment Emily pointed at the dog, the moment the whole courtroom began to believe her, and the moment the truth, buried for years, finally scratched its way back to the surface. Detective Langley stood at the foot of the old house's steps, her badge gleaming in the porch light. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet for what they were about to do. The home had changed owners since the original 2023 raid. The current couple, unaware of its past, had purchased it at a foreclosure auction. Now, with a fresh warrant in hand, Langley was about to uncover what had been missed. "We've got the team," said Officer Kelly, standing beside her. His voice was tight. He had reviewed the footage 5 times on the way over. Max hadn't just barked. He had begged. "This time," Langley said, gripping her flashlight, "we're not ignoring him." Inside, the new homeowners allowed access. They were confused and concerned, offering coffee while the officers explained that a structural review was necessary for the investigation. Downstairs, the basement door looked exactly as it had 2 years ago. Same scuffed wood, same old latch, same chilling quiet beyond it. Langley ran her gloved fingers along the doorframe. "This is where Max went crazy?" Kelly nodded. "Right here. We thought he hit on drug residue, but he wouldn't move from it. And now we know Emily was in this house." She turned. "Let's open it." With a heavy creak, the door gave way. The officers descended the narrow staircase into a cement-lined basement that reeked of mildew. The air was thick and cold. Langley scanned the room with her flashlight. Pipes ran overhead. Boxes of paint and tools lined the shelves. Then she saw it. The back wall was mismatched drywall, too new compared to the rest. Langley stepped forward and knocked. A hollow sound echoed. "Get the team down here now," she ordered. "We've got a false wall." Minutes later, crowbars pried open the hidden structure, and behind it lay a small, concealed room. No windows, no light, no ventilation. Inside were things no one in that room would forget. A stained mattress, a rusted chain bolted to the floor, empty food cans, and a stack of VHS tapes in plastic sleeves. A single pink shoe sat in the corner, untouched by time. Kelly's. Stomach turned. Langley pulled out a recorder. "This is confirmation. Hidden basement room. Signs of long-term confinement. Evidence secured. Immediate crime scene lockdown required." One of the crime scene techs opened the box of tapes. His hands shook. Each was labeled with a date, some from as far back as 2021. He inserted one into a portable VHS reader, despite knowing what he might see. The video flickered on. There was a girl, pale, shaking, no older than 7. She was chained, crying silently in a corner. Her face turned just enough toward the camera to confirm what no one wanted to believe. It was Emily. The tech turned off the player. No one spoke. The silence was louder than a scream. Back at the courthouse, the judge was briefed privately in chambers. Within the hour, Carl Dempsey was rearrested on multiple felony charges including child abuse, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and possession of illicit materials involving a minor. His bail was immediately revoked. The courtroom, which had been skeptical of the quiet girl with the bunny, now hung on every detail of her account. Emily, for the first time, was no longer considered a fragile witness. She was the survivor of a cover-up. And Max, the police dog, was suddenly more than a comfort animal. He was a key piece of the original investigation, the one whose warning had been tragically ignored. Back at the precinct, Langley gave a press briefing. The dog did everything right. He was trained to signal danger, and he did. But the system failed to follow up. This time, thanks to the victim's courage, justice is finally moving forward. Meanwhile, Emily sat in a small therapy room, wrapped in a blanket. Max lay beside her, his head resting on her leg. For hours after the raid, he wouldn't leave her side. It was as if he, too, remembered the weight of that basement, the fear soaked into those walls. Her therapist, Ms. Line, spoke softly. "You are so brave, Emily. Do you want to talk about it?" Emily looked down at Max and ran her fingers through his fur. He was the first one who tried. Miss Lane nodded. "He knew something wasn't right, didn't he?" Emily didn't speak at first. Then she said, "He barked and scratched and pulled." But the man with the badge said, "No." And then ... they left. Tears filled Miss Lane's eyes. "What made you speak in court?" she asked. "I saw his eyes," Emily whispered. "He remembered. I could tell." Back at the courtroom the next day, the prosecutor brought in the retrieved VHS tapes as evidence. Emily was not required to view them. The team had already confirmed the contents through forensic analysis. But the tapes confirmed months, possibly years, of abuse. And Max's bodycam GPS placed him at the exact location of the hidden basement when he barked. It wasn't just Emily's word anymore. It was the dog's memory, the digital trail, and the files no one had opened. The judge allowed a statement from Officer Kelly. "With all due respect," he said firmly, "we didn't listen to Max the first time. And because of that, this child suffered for months. But she never forgot. Neither did he. I hope we all learned something from that." As he finished, Emily stepped into the courtroom, holding Max's leash. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. The entire room rose in silence as she passed by. A girl who had spoken just 2 words, "he knows," and shattered a system's mistake with the truth she carried alone. The courtroom was full again the next morning. Reporters lined the back wall, and sketch artists filled pages as fast as they could draw. Carl Dempsey now sat flanked by 2 deputies, his hands shackled and his eyes hollow. The arrogance he once wore like armor had completely dissolved. Now he simply looked ... trapped. Judge Mendez called the court to order. This session will continue with evidence review based on new findings during the authorized search of the defendants' previous residence. Detective Langley was called to the stand. She walked with purpose, a thick file in her arms. Every juror leaned forward, sensing the magnitude of what was coming. "Detective," the prosecutor began, "can you summarize what your team found?" During the second search, Langley opened the file. "Yes, ma'am. We discovered a concealed room in the basement, hidden behind a false wall. Inside, we found physical evidence of long-term confinement. A mattress, food containers, hand restraints. Additionally, we recovered 34 VHS tapes and 3 journals." "And what was on those tapes?" "Recorded abuse," Langley replied, her voice firm. Some tapes included the victim, Emily Parker, as a minor, appearing to be no older than 6. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. Langley continued. "In addition to the visual evidence, we cross-referenced Max's body cam data from the 2023 raid. It placed him directly in front of that same basement door. Footage shows him barking, scratching, and attempting to dig at the floor." The prosecutor nodded. "Was that behavior consistent with a K-9 alert?" "Yes, it was a classic narcotics or trauma alert. Max was signaling danger. He recognized that something behind the door was wrong, but the command to proceed further was never given. Do you believe, had the teen followed Max's alert, this abuse could have been stopped?" Langley's eyes turned cold. "Absolutely. We could have saved Emily a year of torture." There was no rebuttal. The defense attorney sat frozen, unable to counter the rising wave of evidence. He glanced sideways at Dempsey, who stared down at the floor with the blankness of a man caught in a truth too large to outrun. The judge called for a short recess. Outside the courtroom, Emily sat in a private witness room. Max rested beside her again, as he always did. He seemed to understand when she needed space and when she needed his warmth. Today, he was closer than ever. Her guardian, Ms. Reyes, gently approached her. "They found the room," she whispered. "The secret place you told us about." Emily didn't look up. "I knew it was real." "They saw the tapes, sweetheart. They believe you." Emily finally raised her eyes. "Did they believe Max too?" Ms. Reyes smiled sadly. "Yes, they do now." Emily nodded. "He's the one who tried first. I only remembered because he did." Back in the courtroom, the prosecutor prepared the next witness, a digital forensics expert who confirmed the timestamps on the tapes, linking them to dates when Emily was reported missing from school. The correlation between her absence and the video evidence was undeniable. Each time she didn't show up to class, the expert said, a video was filmed in the basement that same day. When shown a still image from the tape, Emily had quietly confirmed, "That was the day I bit him. He locked me in for 2 days after that." Even the most stoic jurors were visibly shaken. Then, Officer James Kelly took the stand again, this time to explain Max's training and the failure that followed. Max was trained not just to detect drugs, but distress, trauma, blood, human remains. He's incredibly intuitive. On that night, his alert wasn't a random bark. It was a targeted reaction. He knew someone was in danger. The prosecutor asked, Why wasn't the alert followed? Kelly looked pained. We were short on time. The commanding officer didn't think it warranted a forced entry. It was ... a mistake. A mistake that cost a child another year in hell. The courtroom was silent. Then the prosecutor asked a question that made everyone lean in. Has Max ever given a false alert before? Kelly shook his head. Not once in his career. Outside in the hallway, reporters were already composing headlines. Police dog ignored during raid, later proved right in child abuse case. K9 Max's warning could have saved a little girl sooner. The story had grown bigger than anyone expected. But inside the court, all eyes remained on one thing: justice for Emily. That afternoon, Judge Mendez made an announcement. The court acknowledges the exceptional conduct of K9 Officer Max. His initial alert during the 2023 raid has now been recognized as valid and essential to this investigation. He is not only an emotional support dog in this courtroom, he is a key participant in the discovery of truth. There was a soft rustle of approval across the room. Even the jurors smiled. Emily was brought in again. This time she wasn't holding her stuffed bunny. She was holding Max's leash. She approached the judge's bench, not out of obligation, but choice. I remember the sound he made, she said, her voice quiet but clear. He scratched the floor. He growled. He barked and barked. I heard him from inside the room. I thought he was trying to find me. The judge looked down. He was. Emily smiled faintly and sat down. Max curled beside her, his chin resting on her shoes. Across the room, Dempsey looked up. He saw the jury watching him, not with confusion, but revulsion. The tapes, the journals, the basement, all of it was beyond denying now. And worst of all, he had been undone not by a detective or a lawyer, but by a little girl and a dog who never forgot her. A SWAT team stood at the edge of the basement entrance. It was their second visit to the house, this time not as uncertain raiders, but as forensic truth seekers with a laser focus. Now that the false wall had been discovered, they were not going to take any chances. The air inside the narrow stairwell was heavier than anyone expected. Every step downward felt like a descent into something evil that had hidden in plain sight for years. Detective Langley's boots touched the floor first. Behind her, evidence techs snapped photos, scanned with UV lights, and mapped the entire space. Officer Kelly remained upstairs with a hand radio in case anything needed escalation. Though Max wasn't part of the team this time, Kelly found himself absent-mindedly gripping the dog's collar in his hand like a memory. Langley swept her flashlight around the reopened chamber. What had seemed like an empty crawl space was far more sinister. Now that they were looking through the right lens, the one that considered Emily's statements, every object screamed guilt. Chains bolted to the concrete. A pink shoe, mold-covered, but unmistakably a child's. The stuffed unicorn with its left ear torn off. A notebook, carefully preserved in a Ziploc bag, filled with twisted entries in Dempsey's handwriting. The first line on the first page read, "She was scared of the dog." Langley exhaled sharply. "Get this cataloged. Bag everything. Nothing gets overlooked this time." 2 hours later, the forensic team had uncovered more than anyone had imagined. Hidden inside the walls of the false chamber were not only videotapes, but an old Polaroid camera and a shoebox filled with undeveloped film rolls. Every item, every last piece, was evidence that Emily had been telling the truth from the beginning. And more heartbreakingly, that Max had known it too. When Officer Kelly reviewed the layout of the basement, he noticed something that turned his stomach. In the 2023 body cam footage, Max had stopped almost directly in front of the drywall that now exposed the secret chamber. Not just barked there, sat down and refused to move. It was a K-9's most serious alert, the passive sit. A warning of human presence, often used in hostage or trauma situations. And they had walked away. Kelly muttered, "God forgive us." Back at the courthouse, the prosecution team laid out the evidence piece by piece. The jury was given summaries of each tape. None of the jurors were required to watch unless they volunteered, but several did. 2 left the room visibly shaken. Another wept in silence. Emily was not present for the presentation of this evidence. She had already done her part. Her guardian, Ms. Reyes, had taken her to the therapy center where Max now spent his off hours. There, Emily sat on a mat with him curled beside her. He didn't move, even as other children passed through the hall. His attention remained fully on her, as if his assignment wasn't finished. Not until she was safe, truly safe. She whispered into his ear, "You found me." Max gave a single slow tail wag. At trial, the prosecutor made her next move. She introduced a timeline, one that matched Emily's school absence records with Max's K-9 bodycam timestamps and the dates of the tapes. Each point on the board aligned. The evidence told a silent story of consistent abuse, systematic cover-up, and law enforcement negligence. More importantly, it told the story of a little girl who had spent every day wondering if someone remembered her. And someone had. Max. He's not just a comfort dog, the prosecutor told the jury, pointing to Max's original handler. Log. He was an officer, a professional, and he gave the alert we ignored. His instincts were right. Emily was behind that wall. She paused, then said the words that hit like thunder. And Carl Dempsey knew it. That's why he ignored the barking. That's why he sealed the wall. That's why he labeled it a utility room. Because even a dog could sense what he tried to hide. Carl Dempsey didn't look up. His lawyer had stopped objecting hours ago. There was nothing left to defend. Meanwhile, Emily was asked if she'd like to return to the courtroom. She hesitated. Ms. Reyes knelt in front of her and said, "You don't have to go. You've already done more than anyone could ask." But Emily looked at Max and slowly stood up. "He'll come with me?" "Always," so they returned. This time, Emily wore a clean dress with yellow flowers and her hair pulled back, neatly in a braid. She looked stronger now, not because she was fearless, but because she had already faced the worst and survived. Max walked beside her with his vest on. But it wasn't the navy blue one for comfort dogs. It was black, with bold white letters. Retired K-9 Honored Service. As they entered the courtroom, every head turned. The jurors stood. Even the judge rose. It was a silent recognition, not just of bravery, but of something deeper. That, in a world where so many adults had failed, one little girl and one dog had succeeded. The judge allowed Emily to stand beside the bench. She looked at the jury and said, "He barked because I was crying." Then she turned and looked directly at Dempsey, who finally looked at her too. "You tried to shut the door." But Max never forgot. The courtroom was never the same after Emily's words. Every juror wore the expression of someone who had just been asked a question they couldn't forget. The 2 simple sentences, "He barked because I was crying, and you tried to shut the door." But Max never forgot, weren't part of legal testimony. But they echoed louder than anything in the trial. Carl Dempsey stared at the wooden desk in front of him, unmoving. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something in his ear, but he didn't nod or speak. He seemed to know what was coming. Everyone did. The prosecutor wasted no time. The very next morning, she called one last surprise witness, a former neighbor named Janet Pollard, who had lived 3 houses down from Dempsey for almost 10 years. She'd moved away 2 years ago, but after watching the news, she called the DA's office and insisted on speaking. Janet was small, gray-haired, and wore thick glasses. But when she entered the courtroom, her back was straight and her voice firm. "I always thought something was off about that man," she began. "We never talked much. But once, back in 2023, I remember seeing him come home with a girl in the back seat. I didn't recognize her. That night, I heard what sounded like crying from his basement." She paused. "And I called the police. I actually called. They came too. I watched them. But they left after just 15 minutes. I assumed it was nothing. I told myself I'd imagined it. I've regretted that ever since." The prosecutor nodded. "Do you know the name of the officer who responded?" Janet hesitated. "Not exactly, but there was a dog with him, a police dog, black and brown. I remember because I thought it was odd. He brought a canine to a noise complaint." A ripple passed through the courtroom. It was the same night from Max's body cam footage. The same night the bark had gone unheeded. Janet's testimony was the missing puzzle piece. Not only had Max alerted, but a civilian neighbor had reported the incident, and the department had failed to follow up. Officer Kelly, who was in the room watching from the back, closed his eyes for a moment. He hadn't even remembered the neighbor. That night had been one of dozens that blurred together. But now, every detail was sharp and painful. They'd been told to clear the scene quickly. No one wanted extra paperwork. Max's alert had been waved off. Kelly had assumed it was a dog error. But Max had never been wrong. That afternoon, the defense attorney finally cracked. He requested a private meeting with the judge and prosecutor. When they returned, the judge announced that Dempsey's legal team had offered a plea, full confession to all charges, including unlawful imprisonment, abuse, and obstruction of justice, in exchange for removing the death penalty from the table. The room went still. Emily wasn't in the courtroom this time. She didn't need to be. But Max was. And when the judge accepted the plea, and the courtroom sat stunned in silence, Max let out a quiet, single bark, not loud, not aggressive. Just one sharp, punctuating sound, like a period at the end of a sentence. Some swore later it felt like closure. Others believed it was his way of saying finally. News of the trial traveled fast. Within 24 hours, media outlets across the U.S. were running the story. Little girl's 2 words lead to confession. K-9 officer solves cold case. The dog who knew. Headlines spun the tale in different ways, but all carried one common theme: a brave little girl and a dog who never gave up. Emily's story didn't just shake the courtroom. It shook the system. A citywide audit of past K-9 alerts was launched. Dozens of prior cases were reopened for review, especially ones involving Max. Officer Kelly was placed on temporary leave pending internal review, but instead of protesting, he volunteered to help with the audit. He knew this wasn't about saving his own job. It was about making sure the system never ignored a bark again. 1 week after the trial, the mayor made an official public statement. Standing on the steps of City Hall, he faced a wall of reporters and cameras. "In a world full of noise," he began, "sometimes the most important voices are the ones we don't understand. We failed to listen when Max barked. We failed to act when Emily was crying. But because of their bravery, we've been given a second chance, not just to seek justice, but to do better." Then he paused and smiled. "I'm proud to announce that Officer Max has been formally honored with the city's Medal of Valor. He is now officially retired from duty, but his service will never be forgotten." The mayor stepped aside, and Max trotted onto the stage with Kelly holding his leash. Emily followed close behind. She stood beside Max, holding a small certificate of her own, a Community Hero Award. Though it didn't sparkle like the medal on Max's collar, it meant just as much. Reporters asked questions, but Emily said only one thing: Max barked because he loved me. The courtroom may have gone quiet, but the rest of the country was just starting to raise its voice. Within days of the plea deal, Emily and Max became national names. News anchors spoke of the K9 who cracked a cold case. Morning shows begged for interviews. Editorials praised Emily's quiet courage. Social media overflowed with clips, photos, and artistic tributes to Max, some drawn by children, others by professional illustrators. But none of it compared to what happened next. The governor of the state issued a public apology. In a live press conference, he addressed the systemic failures that had allowed Emily's suffering to go unnoticed. "It is unacceptable," he said, "that a little girl had to speak the truth through a dog's loyalty. We must do better." He then announced the formation of a new task force, one that would focus on reviewing overlooked K9 alerts, prioritizing cases with flagged anomalies, especially involving vulnerable victims like children. They called it the Max Protocol. The idea was simple. Any future K9 alert involving possible harm to a child would require follow-up by a child services specialist and an internal review team. No exceptions. The bark would never be dismissed again. Back in Emily's world, things were shifting quietly. She no longer had to sit in the small therapy room with two-way mirrors and anxious counselors scribbling notes. Instead, she was now under the care of Dr. Marisol Vance, a gentle but firm child trauma specialist who understood the weight of silence. Emily still didn't talk much, at least not to most people. But to Max, she spoke often. In the comfort of a donated therapy farm just outside the city, Max lay in the grass while Emily played beside him, brushing his fur, drawing chalk pictures, and whispering stories. She called him her forever friend. Dr. Vance observed the way Max responded, not just with his eyes, but with his whole body. Ears perked at Emily's soft voice, tail wagged subtly, even his breathing slowed. The dog had bonded beyond service. It was now protection, companionship, and healing in a way no medication could mimic. Meanwhile, Officer Kelly faced his own transformation. The internal investigation cleared him of wrongdoing, but confirmed there had been negligence within his department. Instead of returning to his previous post, Kelly requested a transfer, not out of guilt, but purpose. He joined the new Max Protocol Task Force as a senior K9 advisor. He also began touring police academies across the country, giving talks titled "The Bark We Ignored," an emotional, unflinching lecture on the importance of listening, empathy, and trusting not only the K9's instincts, but also children's subtle signals. At one event in Chicago, Kelly paused in front of a room full of cadets and said, "We trained Max to detect danger." But what we didn't realize was that he also detected pain, the kind we adults are sometimes too busy or too proud to see. But the most unexpected turn came from Dempsey himself. Once imprisoned, he attempted to retract his plea, claiming coercion. The judge rejected it immediately, citing overwhelming evidence. However, his appeal created a legal ripple. Every case involving dismissed K9 alerts was now considered vulnerable to challenge. The state responded by rushing to reinforce its new policy. They introduced a bill, Max's Law, that gave dogs like Max legal standing as witnesses in abuse-related cases, based on their handler's testimony and corroborating behavioral patterns. It was controversial. Some called it emotional propaganda. Others called it progress. But for one family, it meant everything. A young boy in Arizona, only 6 years old, had been living in foster care after years of unexplained trauma. No one could get him to talk. But after watching a clip of Emily and Max on TV, the boy pointed to the screen and said, "Like me." That simple statement reopened his case. He, too, had barked in his own way, and finally someone listened. As autumn turned the trees gold, a special ceremony was held at the Capitol. Emily was there, dressed in a navy blue jacket and holding Max's leash proudly. Her adoptive parents stood beside her, tears in their eyes. The governor stepped forward and pinned a small gold medallion onto Max's collar, beneath the Medal of Valor he already wore. "This," the governor said, "is the first Max Law ceremony, and it won't be the last. Today, we honor not just a dog and a girl, but a promise that no voice will be ignored, that no bark will be silenced, that truth will find a way to be heard, even if it comes from a child and a dog." Emily didn't give a speech. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped up to the microphone, took a deep breath, and in front of thousands said just 2 words: "Thank you." Then Max barked once beside her, and the crowd erupted in applause. A year had passed since Emily first pointed at Max and said those unforgettable 2 words. The world had moved on in many ways, but for those involved, everything had changed permanently. Emily was no longer a scared, silent girl tucked behind a defense attorney's desk. She had grown stronger, louder, not in volume, but in presence. Her eyes, once cautious and hollow, now carried light and curiosity. Her steps no longer shuffled with fear. They carried purpose. She was still in therapy, but she no longer needed daily sessions. Dr. Vance now only met with her once a week. Max was still beside her every day, not as a service dog anymore, but as her best friend and family. Emily had even returned to school. At first, it was hard. Whispers, stares, well-meaning questions from kids who had seen her on the news. But Emily surprised everyone. She stood tall. She didn't tell her whole story, but she didn't deny it either. And when a classmate asked her, "Was it really you who saved everyone?" she smiled and replied, "Max saved me first." Max, now considered a national hero, received his own set of honors. He was retired officially from duty by the police department and gifted full-time to Emily. His name appeared in school books about courage. Statues were commissioned in 3 different cities, not just to honor Max, but all service dogs who had been ignored, misunderstood, or underutilized. Max had become a symbol of something larger, the bridge between human empathy and animal instinct. Even police departments that had resisted canine units began changing their tune. Officers across the country trained differently now, not just in obedience or detection, but in psychological understanding. Max had proven dogs could be more than tools. They could be advocates, witnesses, even silent protectors of truth. Meanwhile, Emily's story had begun shaping policy in ways no one expected. Max's Law was now active in 6 states and under review in 8 more. It was reshaping the way abuse cases were approached. Child psychologists began requesting trained dogs for interviews. New legal clauses allowed trained handlers to present canine reactions as supplementary evidence with strict conditions. Of course, but the precedent was revolutionary. At a national child advocacy conference, Dr. Vance presented a study titled, "When the Bark is Louder Than Words, Emotional Trust in Canine Human Therapy for Traumatized Youth." The data was undeniable. Children paired with therapy dogs opened up 3 times faster and recovered with fewer relapses. Emily had inspired not only laws, but science. Back in their quiet neighborhood, things finally began to feel normal, a new kind of normal. Emily had joined a small art club where she loved painting images of animals, especially dogs. One of her drawings, a picture of Max standing in front of a courthouse with his ears up, won a national art contest and now hung in a child advocacy center in Boston. Her adoptive parents, Mark and Lila, had also found peace. After the chaos, legal battles, and therapy sessions, their house felt like a home again. They now fostered other children, many of whom had endured their own forms of trauma. Emily helped them adjust, not by lecturing or trying too hard, but simply by being there, painting at the table, reading books, sitting beside Max, while the others slowly opened up. Max had become a healing presence for all. Then one day, something unexpected arrived in the mail, a letter. It was handwritten, careful, formal. It was from the daughter of Officer Ryan Kelly. "Dear Emily," it began. "My dad passed away last week in a car accident while returning from a training in Ohio. He always talked about you and Max. He said meeting you changed how he saw everything, kids, justice, even dogs. He wanted me to send you this." Inside the envelope was a small badge. Not a police badge, something different. It was a challenge coin awarded by Officer Kelly to his K-9 unit's most exceptional contributors. It had Max's name engraved on the front, and on the back were the words, "For those who speak without words and are still heard." Emily held it tight. She cried quietly that night, not out of pain, but gratitude for the man who'd trusted his dog and for the bond that had changed both their lives. The story came full circle one spring morning when Emily was invited to speak at a youth leadership summit. It was optional. She could have said no, but she didn't. She stood on a small stage, with Max lying patiently behind her, and faced a room of other kids, all survivors of different things: bullying, abuse, loss, neglect. She didn't tell everything, but she told them enough. She told them that sometimes adults don't listen, not because they don't care, but because they don't understand. She told them that sometimes the most important truths come out when we're not even trying to say them. A whisper, a look, a gesture, even a point at a dog. And she ended with this: if someone doesn't listen the first time, keep trying. Because someone will. And when they do, your whole world can change. Max barked softly in agreement, and the audience stood in applause for the girl, for the dog, for the truth that finally broke through, and for every child still waiting to be heard. The end.